Hey everyone, this is Matt with Learn Everything About Design, and in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the Scan Otter from Creality. Now, full disclosure, Creality did send this to me, so this is a paid promotion video for whatever that's worth to you. Now, in this video, we'll talk about the Scan Ferret, which we've already covered on this channel. We'll talk about the Otter, we'll talk a little bit about the Lizard, and mention all the scanners in the Creality lineup. What we're not going to be doing is comparing this to scanners from other manufacturers. I'm sure that you will have questions, and if you want those questions answered, I'll do my best to get them in the comments. But this video is solely dedicated to focusing on this, how it fits in the Creality ecosystem, and what are the pros and cons. First thing that we want to talk about is price. Now, we are not currently set up as an affiliate for Creality, so if that does happen to change, I will put that in the description of the video. But as of right now, unfortunately, we don't have a discount code or we don't have a link that you can use to help support the channel. If you are looking for ways to support the channel, we do have a merch store. We also do have learneverythingaboutdesign.com where we do sell courses. But for this video, let's take a look at this Creality Scan Otter, talk about the price, where it fits in, and all that good stuff. So first things first, price. Creality has 4 scanners in their lineup. They've got the Scan Lizard, they've got the Ferret, the Otter, and the Raptor. And I know how ridiculous that sounds. I don't know why they're all named after animals and a dinosaur, but let's go ahead and just see where everything fits in. So personally, I don't have any experience with the Raptor. It's just kind of new on the market. They're hard to get. Hopefully we can get our hands on one, but it's different. And when I say it's different, these are IR structured light scanners. The Scan Raptor is a laser scanner. Now, it's touted to be probably the cheapest laser scanner that you could ever get your hands on. Some of the next closest ones are like the Shining 3D FreeScan, which is I think $17,000. So you are not going to get your hands on a laser scanner any cheaper than that Scan Raptor. So hopefully we can cover that in the near future. But because it's a laser scanner, it's different technology, and also it's a higher price point, about $1,500, we're going to exclude it from this discussion. So the 3 scanners that we have to talk about are the Scan Lizard, the Scan Ferret, and the Scan Otter. I would personally take the Scan Lizard out of the conversation. Now, for a couple of different reasons. When we start to get into the specs of these 2 scanners here, you're going to see that the Scan Lizard is meant to scan small objects, which this does very well. And it really is missing some of the technology that had been packed into these 2 scanners. So because of that, and because the price point is so close to this one, I wouldn't even consider it as an option. But for the purposes of this video, let's talk a little bit about it as well. So when we first get into the price, we've got $900 US for the Scan Otter. We've got $300 to $400 for the Scan Ferret, and about $600 to $800 for the Scan Lizard. Now the Scan Lizard does come with a couple of things that these 2 scanners don't. It comes with a tripod. It also has a sort of photo box that it comes with if you get the top level kit. But it's missing some technology. It does not have the ability to do color capture scans without pairing it to a smartphone or a DSLR camera. So because of that, and because the accuracy and precision is better on the Otter, I'm just going to discount it from the jump. So now let's talk about these 2. $300 to $900. And the reason I'm saying $300 because that's the bottom end price is because the one that we tested here, the Pro version, has the Wi-Fi 6 bridge. Currently, the Scan Otter does not have the ability to do wireless scanning. There is no Wi-Fi accessory, there's not an app that supports it, and there aren't accessories to make that happen. The Creality site does mention that they are working on that and they will be releasing it soon. But if we're just looking pure technology wired to a laptop or a desktop, $300 to $900. Is this worth 3 times the price? Yes, I think it is. And there are a couple reasons for that. So when you get started looking at the specs, you've got your single frame accuracy, and that's really looking at 0.02 millimeters for the Scan Otter and 0.1 millimeter for the Ferret. Now, that's not to say that this doesn't do a great job. It just means that this is a higher level of precision and accuracy. So one of the reasons that they can do that is because it has multiple depth cameras. This actually gives us the ability to scan small objects, medium objects, and large objects. Now, when we think small objects, it's anywhere from about a 10 by 10 millimeter square up to 250 millimeter square. When we think about big objects, we're talking about a couple of thousand millimeters, so really scanning a car, scanning a motorcycle, larger objects like that. That represents a big jump from picking up something like this for $300 that is really only okay with scanning medium objects. Same thing with the Scan Lizard, it really is only focused on those small objects. And if you go outside of that range and need to scan something bigger, you can't do it. So the Scan Otter wins because it gives you a lot of versatility. It has those three modes, small, medium, and large. It does have the ability to do marker tracking. Of course, it does have things like body and face mode. If you're watching this channel, that's probably not what you're trying to do with it, so I'm not scanning my face, but it does have that built in. When we get into things like resolution, this is really talking about how far apart the points are in 3D. The resolution of this has a range, 0.05 millimeters to 2 millimeters. And again, because it has that sort of set of cameras, it can do small objects and it can do big objects. When we look at the Scan Ferret, that is looking at 0.16 millimeters. So again, this basically represents how close those points are in space when we start scanning. Some of the specs between these two are actually identical or pretty close. They both do 24-bit color scanning. They both have the sort of built-in IMU anti-shake. So as you're moving around an object, it doesn't lose tracking that easily if you sort of judder and shake. They both will do shiny black objects. They both claim to scan outside. Now, that is something that is difficult to quantify, and partially because the light source varies so much. If you're outside on a summer day in the middle of the day, you are sitting at around 100,000 to 120,000 lux. The claim from Creality is anything under 30,000 lux is okay. Now, the lights here in this room give us about 3,000 lux. If we're outside on a cloudy day, that's about 30,000. So it can work outside, and I actually have had pretty good results scanning outside, but just keep in mind, it's not a universal, you can use it outside anytime. Direct sunlight, it's gonna be a no-go. But the Otter actually has quite a bit of illumination on it. There's some LEDs that can illuminate objects, so when you're doing color capture, you don't have shadowing issues as you're going around objects, and it just does a better job overall than the Scan Ferret. So if you only need to scan medium objects, or if you definitely have to use that Wi-Fi bridge, then spending about $400 for the Scan Ferret is a good investment. However, if you don't really need to worry about that Wi-Fi bridge yet, because again, Creality is working on it, and you need to scan more than just those medium objects, and I'm talking about anything from a video game controller to, say, a bike helmet, then moving up to something like the Otter makes a lot of sense. Where they also differ is in the frame rates, or at least in the claimed frame rates. Now, Creality says the Scan Ferret will do 30 frames a second. In my testing, I never was able to hit that. I did use the Wi-Fi bridge on a phone, did use a laptop, I did use a desktop. It did well, but I don't think I ever hit 30 frames a second. The Otter claims 20 frames a second, and I actually got better results than that on a desktop machine. I'm sitting below that 10 to 15, 10 to 17 frames a second on this laptop here. So I think that this is definitely system dependent. So if you have a better processor, if you've got a better GPU, more RAM, you can expect to see better results than that 20 frames a second. Of course, depending on the settings that you're using, fast mode, high quality mode, small, medium, large objects, that is all going to vary those frames per second rating. But with the Ferret, I did notice that it was a little bit lower than that claimed rate. We're kind of splitting hairs here. The difference between 27 frames a second and 30 frames a second is not honestly that much. We're not talking about spending $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 on a scanner. We're talking about, again, consumer grade scanners. So you really don't have a lot of options, and the system is going to make more of a difference than the scanner is, in my opinion. So with all of that said, let's talk a little bit about the system just for a second, because I had some problems that I ran into when prepping for this video, and I'm using a fairly old laptop. I have a probably 2017, 2018 Dell Precision laptop, and it's running a 7th gen i7 processor. I've got a Quadro P4000 card and 32 gigs of RAM. Now, when I first did my testing on this, I tested it on a docking station and had pretty good results, brought it down here to the garage, and it was at 2 frames a second. I couldn't figure out what was going on. I actually formatted the entire laptop, wiped everything out, and started from scratch, and got the same results. It turns out it was a power supply issue. So I had a 240 watt power supply, which I've been using for years. The computer's been slowing down. I never realized that the power supply was the issue. No indication of it. I have a smaller power supply on here now, and it's running fine. It pegs the processor, which in this case, the baseline is 2.9 gigahertz. It has the boost on it, which goes up to 4. It's pegging the GPU at about 80%, and it does really well. Where you're going to notice a difference in, let's say, CPU speed, the GPU on your graphics card, and the amount of RAM you have really comes down to processing. So capturing, there's a variability there. Of course, a better system is going to capture faster. You're going to get higher frames per second. But as soon as you start processing that raw data, that's where you're really going to want a higher end system. Now, the way that I approach this is I generally will capture to the laptop and I will process it on a desktop machine. That's just how I've always done it, because the laptop just doesn't quite have the horsepower that my desktop machine does. So that's just my own recommendation. If you are in the market for a scanner, whether it is this scanner or not, you do have to consider that system. And some scanners require more than others. The Ferret, because it can use a cell phone and you can pair it there, you're certainly not going to be processing the scans that way, but it does allow you a little bit more flexibility to not need a laptop. As soon as the Scan Otter does have that Wi-Fi 6 bridge and the ability to scan to a mobile app, you are going to potentially skip the need to get a decent laptop to make this work. But again, I capture with the laptop, I process with a desktop. So with all that out of the way, let's take a look at a few examples of things that I scanned. So of course, one of the big things is shiny objects. These bar clamps are from one of my KTMs, a 250XC, and this is a series that we did probably about 2 years ago at this point, where we reverse engineered this, and we couldn't scan the shiny object. I had to do a flat primer on it in order to get it to capture with the scanner we were using at the time. Well, I'm happy to say that this thing, the Scan Otter, didn't care. The clear anodized finish on the machined sort of tumbled part versus the flat paint, it picked them up the same. I didn't notice any difference in capturing. So that's a big plus. After this, I tried to scan something shinier and I wasn't able to. I tried to scan a socket, which is basically like scanning a mirror, and that didn't happen. Not surprised, so it will do shiny objects, but there is of course going to be a limit. If you got something that's shiny that is, let's say, a tumbled aluminum with a clear finish on it, it seems to do it just fine. That's good, because that's something like a rim on a car. That's usually where you're going to see some problems with other scanners, but this did fine. The next thing I tried was the triple clamp from the same bike. This is black anodized and it's as machined finished, so this is not tumbled. It's a bit shinier than the triple clamp bar mounts. So the triple clamp itself has given me trouble with every other scanner I've tried. And I've tried a lot of scanners to scan this without prep, of course. But this one picked it up fine. I did not have any issues scanning this with the Scan Otter. So that's pretty impressive. Now, I will say that I did have a tracking issue. Because this is a symmetric part, as scanning is happening around the outside where it's rounded, it kind of loses tracking. So you probably want to put things around on your workbench or your table, and that would really help out when you're trying to track something like this that does have symmetry or some kind of repeating feature. So the next thing that we tried is a set of throttle bodies. Now, these are from an 84 Kawasaki 750 Turbo. This is part of a project that I'm working on that hopefully we'll see on this channel in the near future. But I wanted to try this because this is a black powder coat. So it's shining, but obviously it's dusty and dirty, and these things are almost as old as me. But it didn't have any problem with this. I tried this on both the small object mode and the medium object mode. It kind of falls in between those two ranges. And the small object mode was able to track just fine. It still had a wide enough field of view that it could capture details between each throttle body. Now on the medium mode, it did great. Of course, you're gonna lose a little bit of resolution. The precision and accuracy numbers drop a bit because you're capturing more data and it's dropping those numbers. But depending on what you needed that scan for, it would be perfectly fine on the medium mode as well. If you're just looking for a 3D representation of where this thing needs to be in relation to something else, that medium mode is great. If you actually needed to make, let's say, a plate to mount injectors or needed some sort of equipment to hold anything here, then you would probably want to use that small mode and get the higher precision and accuracy. Didn't really have any problems with this other than what you would expect. Shining into sort of deeper, darker areas, that's where you would need a laser scanner. An IR scanner like this is just not going to work. But other than that, I was extremely pleased with how well it did. The next thing we tried is a disc guard. Now, the reason I wanted to do this is because there are a lot of flat surfaces here, and I've scanned this with a couple of other scanners, and a lot of times what I find is that they have trouble, because this is a thin part, they have trouble getting the sides. And I was pleasantly surprised with how well the Scan Otter did on this. So this is not prepped, obviously. It is a little shiny, but I left the sort of layer of dust on it, and it picked everything up just fine. This is a part that would be a great candidate for the medium scan size because it kind of fits within that confines of that. And we could get enough details of, say, the mounting point locations and the overall size of this to design our own part. One of the other parts I had laying around, of course, was the turbo housing, again from that same GPZ project. This has still got scan spray on it, and it didn't have any trouble picking this up, obviously. But I wanted to see how well it did with the casting marks, and again, pleasantly surprised. Because the resolution and the accuracy are pretty good on this scanner, again, 0.02 millimeters, we're able to pick up the casting marks without any trouble. And one thing that I was impressed with is the tracking. So it did a great job tracking. Now, I will say that the Otter seems to always capture color. You can't turn that option off. And with that, if you've got an object, say a gas tank on a motorcycle that has some graphics or decals, it uses those to help with tracking, even though you may not see that on the screen. If you've got something that's big and flat, like a fender of a car or a hood, you're gonna need marker dots. It doesn't really do well with those nondescript features. So that's an area where you will need to use something like marker dots or place features like crumpled up pieces of tape or paper. Now, I did try to scan some car parts, and again, you will need markers for those bigger areas, but it actually did pretty well on some areas like the marker lights and fog lenses and stuff like that. Areas where other scanners tend to have a little bit more trouble, it actually did a pretty good job there, so I was impressed with that as well. So with all that said, those all seem like big positives. There are some negatives. So the negatives or the downsides are really in two main areas. The first of which is going to be what's in the kit. Now, with this kit, you don't get a turntable and you don't get a tripod handle. Now, the turntable, you can take it or leave it depending on what you're doing with the scanner, but the fact that the scanner has a near or a close mode to do small objects, that really means to me that it should have a tripod and it should have a turntable. Now, I hope they make a version of the scanner that has those in a kit, and that will be really helpful. There is a small rubber plug on the outside of the unit that you can remove, and there's a 1/4-20 thread there, so you can use your own handle if you want. The other thing with the orientation and the handle is the fact that by default, the scanner orientation in the software when they're scanning wants to be horizontal. I found that it's probably more comfortable to hold it vertically, and that's the orientation of the buttons as well. So there is an option in the software that you can rotate the view 90 degrees left or right, and that way you can get the scanner to that vertical orientation, how you want to hold it. It would be great if you could switch that on the fly if it kind of knew as you rotated, but that's probably a bit too much to ask. The other thing that I think makes a big difference with these scanners, and something I wish Creality would spend more time on, is the software. Now, it's not to say that the Creality Scan software is bad, it's just pretty minimal. Now, when we look at the scan software that's available for other scanners in this segment, they all kind of follow the same sort of problem. They don't have enough options to truly do a deep dive process of your scan data. Now, there is an undo and redo button, so you can go back if you captured a couple bad frames. That's very handy when you're scanning and you lose tracking. You can pause, go back. I really like the way that they incorporated the buttons on the scanner, the play pause button with the light around it to tell you if you're too close or too far. That is a great thing. But really what I would hope for is more options in the software where we could process the mesh a little bit better. So with that said, that's really the big detractor. You can certainly get yourself a tripod or a handle easy enough. So that's not a big negative for me, but the software is really one that I really hope with the Scan Raptor and its functionality being the lowest priced laser scanner that's on the market, I really hope that they put some more work into the software and offer up some more professional solutions for processing those scans. Now, if you're a user that is really looking at the one-click solution, or you don't really need to fine-tune the points or the mesh, it's great. It's easy to use. There's really not any problems with using it. But if you're a user that's looking for a bit more control, you're probably going to end up taking your scans and exporting them to something like MeshLab, which is a free software, processing them there, and then bringing them back in or doing some more manipulation there. Unlike the 3D printing segment, which I have a Creality K1 Max that I use, unlike that where you really have free reign of slicers that you use, with 3D scanners, you're kind of stuck with whatever the manufacturer is. And that's not just a Creality thing, that's pretty much across the board. You have to use that scan software to capture the data, and then you can take the point clouds out from there and process it. But I think overall, I'm pretty impressed with how well this did. I love the fact that it does have multiple depth cameras, so you can do near mode and far mode and things like that. Now, of course, it's called small, medium, and large objects here, but that's essentially what we're doing, is we're just toggling back and forth between those depth cameras. I think that the value that's offered above the Scan Ferret and the Scan Lizard, I think it's well worth the money that they're asking for this. I would reserve my judgment on the right scanner to buy until I get my hands on the Scan Raptor, because I think that a laser scanner that's $600 more than this might be worth more in the end. But again, that's still kind of up in the air because I haven't used one yet. So if you have any questions on the Scan Otter, the Ferret, anything else in the Creality line that I can try to answer, if you do have questions on this, compared to another scanner that we've covered on the channel, I will do my best to give you my opinion on that. And any questions in general, please leave them in the comments. As always, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.